Hello, welcome back to Dawn's Tailor Made. So these pouches, I cannot stop making them now. The size, I've made sure that you could pop some money in there, but if you wanted to put a gift card in, if you're not doing presents this year because you can't, it's a lot of postage if you're going to do a big present and send it. So you can, morning Karen, so you can stick a gift card in there, okay, but the idea is to make them look like a hanging bauble. So I've tried different colours. I think having the different colour at the top, ideally I would put gold on here or silver, depending on what the top of your baubles are. But if you're gifting it to somebody else, then maybe theirs will be a different colour anyway. So the idea came from this cute little pouch that I made. Now I boxed the corners on this one, but on these I've been taking out the corners, experimenting with the different sizes. So these I've just taken the corner off when I've sewn, but this one I actually did use a round shape. So I'm still experimenting. This one is a Christmas pud, and we're going to be making the Christmas pud now, but I'm going to free motion these bits of, is that the icing? Is that what you put? Or is it cream? No, I guess it's cream, isn't it? Oh, yes. Yummy. So let's get started. I'll show you what we need. Now, depending on what theme you're making, I'll take that down because you can't see. There you go. Depending on your theme, so I'm using, this is supposed to be a brown colour. I didn't know whether to put to free motion some berries and raisins and other things that would be in a Christmas pud. So this may grow, it may become a bit bigger, more of a free motion project. So you need a piece of fabric 5 inches by 4 inches, okay? So you need 2 for your outer pieces and 2 for your lining pieces. Now it doesn't matter what colour your lining piece is because it's such a small pouch. I mean, I did use the coordinating one because I thought this one you could be reversible depending on which side you preferred to have. So but this one I'm just using just a normal colour, and then you need 2 pieces for your casing, okay? Now this is quite an easy way of making a drawstring bag. So although we're making these little pouches, if you wanted to make a drawstring bag as a gift bag, just change the measurements, okay? So this is going to be folded in half, okay, and then we're going to add a seam around it. So once it's finished, all you need to do is think about how small you would want your casing, okay? So you can work that out. If you wanted this to be a 10 by 8 pouch, then figure out how much you need to come in. Once you've seen this one made, you'll be able to see how much you need to come in, okay, and then to make yourself a bigger pouch. You could make a huge one. We're going to make some huge Christmas sacks, so if you want to wait for that video, then you can. So let's get started. Let's move these pieces out of the way. I'll bring in the machine. Now I'm going to do the free motion first, okay, so I will put the free motion foot on. Machine off. Now for those of you that don't have a free motion foot or you haven't used one before, they are an amazing thing to use. You can make so many brilliant effects using them. You can draw with them, you can write names with them, you can do so much with a free motion foot just with a little bit of practice. So this is what my free motion foot looks like. Now when you have it in your manual or when it comes, it may be called a darning foot, okay, but we now use it for free motion. So this, slightly lower, sorry for fiddling, there we go. So this screw here that you unscrew to get your needles in and out when you're changing your needles, this bar here needs to go on top of that screw, okay? Now there will be instructions that come with your foot, or have a look in your manual, and then you just screw or screw back in. Okay, now I always use a proper screwdriver. I know machines come with one, but I just like to make sure it's really in there and it isn't going to move, okay? Now this foot, unlike most of the other feet, okay, it doesn't have that little gap, so you cannot get the fabric down inside. So just hold onto your thread. So put your needle down, needle back up as if you were pulling up your thread, and then take your scissors or something that's small enough and just go along, and it pulls both of your threads, she says. Should we do it again? And it will pull. It's not strong enough. Oh, there we go. It will usually pull both your threads through. There we go. Okay, so now you've got both of your threads going backwards. Now, I haven't shown you how I've drawn my pieces of cream, we decided, didn't we? Because I think you can probably get this, get a picture from the internet. You just need to make it so that it's quite drippy, shall we say, and then you just pop that on top of your main fabric. Now I have interfaced this. Whenever we do free motion, we interface. Okay, so that is what that looks like. Now with this one, you may have noted that the cream is slightly smaller, okay, because when I cinched it up and the cream went all the way along, once I cinched it up, you sort of lost the effect. Okay, so, but I am going to free motion this, so in theory it's going to attach to the pudding, shall we say, and then it should stay, but we shall see. Okay, so all I'm going to do is draw with my foot and my needle. Now I have white thread in here. Okay, now that's my needle down. Now I'm going to shorten my stitch to a 0.5 and a 1.0, okay, and I'll do it this way so you can all see. There we go. Okay, and then I'm just going to dance my fingers backwards and forwards and basically draw with my foot. So needle down. Okay, now it's quite noisy, this. A little bit slower. You can see that that is now attached, but just by doing one piece it doesn't look like it's been intended. It looks like I've done a very wonky line, so I'm going to do it again 2 or 3 times. Okay, now it has that rustic look to it. Okay, and then when it cinches up it will be still attached, it won't be flipping up and down. Okay, so let's take our foot off. Now I did think about adding some berries to the top here. Okay, I did get my red thread out, but I think I'm going to try that on another one. We'll just see how the cream looks for now. So I'm going to take the foot off again. Now, if you enjoyed watching that bit of free motion, I really do recommend you getting a free motion foot. it is my favourite thing to do when I sew. I mean, I love making bags, I love doing things like that, but definitely for a creative outlet, drawing with my foot and my needle is, oh, it's so much fun. It really is. I love it. I've been practicing my name, so when I do some gift bags in a later video, you'll be able to see that you can actually write names with your free motion foot. Okay, so our cream is now on. So let's get back to the rest of the tutorial now. I noticed, okay, white on white you cannot see. There we go. So these are our long pieces, okay, and they were 2 by 8 by 5, 8.5, okay. Now we are folding these in half long ways, okay, and then we need to make a circle or a tube with them. So we are sewing just the top pieces together, okay, and then this will be open. So I'm going to fold my other one up and then I will sew them both together. Now you should have your iron on for this bit because we'll be ironing our seams down, okay. So all I'm doing, as I usually do, is I'm using the edge of my foot as my guide and I'm placing it against my fabric. And this is quite thin, so we'll use Clive's tip and we will hold our thread up, okay. Default, just make sure that my stitch size is back to normal. Hold this thread up, needle down, and start sewing. And that just stops my fabric from disappearing into my machine. Don't know if that happens to you guys, but when I'm using a thinner, this is old sheeting. This is an old bed sheet, so I don't know if it is cotton. I don't think it is, and even if it is very old, so it is now very, very thin. And I know that if I started stitching, that would disappear into my machine. Okay. Now we'll bring the iron in. Place that there so you can see. And there is our hem. Okay, our seam. So we're going to open out our seam and we are going to iron it flat. Okay, so with all these little projects, there are lots of things that you can learn as a beginner, ready for bigger projects. Okay, so this is showing you how to press your seams open, and then you turn right side out. There is your seam, okay, and we are going to pinch our seam so that it goes onto the outside, and then we're going to iron that down again. So this is just showing you how, if you were, maybe this could be a seam on a bag, if you were doing bag making or for your lining or for your strap, then that is the method that you would use for pressing open your seam. So these are your raw edges, okay? We're going to fold that down, the raw edges are together, and then we're going to iron that flat. Okay, and then I should just show you again with the other one. So if it asks for you to open, so you can press your seams to the left or to the right, but I'm going to show you how to do them open. Okay, so press that seam down and it's now equal on both sides. Okay, turning it right sides out, so that's right sides together. This is just a plain fabric, so it is harder to see. And then we're going to iron that flat, so there's a seam on this side and no seam on that side. I just think it's a nicer effect than sometimes people sew these bits together, and I just think it's nicer to have it in one smooth piece. So again, raw edges and then iron that flat. And what will happen is we will be threading our elastic through. This will become the casing. Okay, so that's why we need that bit open. So I'm just going to iron down my Christmas pud. just to make that smooth. There's lots of threads on the end, so I'm going to take those off now because they will end up sticking out of our seams. Now, one of the better tools that I have in my sewing room is a lint remover. Is that what it's called? You know, when you get the roller brush. So I'm always getting bits of thread, so you want to invest in a roller brush, because now, rather than those bits being stuck on my item that I'm sewing, they are now on my lint brush. Okay, so we need right sides up, okay, and then these are our raw edges here, and this is our folded piece with our raw edges, and our raw edges are going all up together, and then you want to leave an equal distance between this side and this side, okay, and then pop your lining fabric on the top. Now if you wanted to pin that, you can. Remember to place your pins outside, and then you can pull them out as you're sewing. I'll just show you that again. So, I mean, these fabrics are now, this one doesn't matter which way around it goes. Okay, so right side's up. Here are my raw edges of my longer side. Here are my raw edges, matching them up so they are equal. I'm just going to re-iron that because there is a smaller edge on there, and I don't want that to not be caught by the sewing machine. Okay, so here we go. So raw edges all together, and then place your lining fabric on the top, and then I'm going to pop it in another pin just to hold. That's quite a big sandwich there, so just want to hold all those pieces together. And now we're going to use the same seam allowance that we used before, and we're just going to sew straight across the top. Now, as I've said, I don't always you know, use the 3/8 measurement. What I like to do is use the edge of my foot, and I place the edge of my foot on my fabric like that. And then, although there are quite a few, I'm getting used to doing this now, because it just stops all of my fabric from disappearing into my machine, because it just makes it quite annoying and you have to stop and start. So I just do that every time now. So holding up my threads and just now. Was quite noisy because there are quite a few layers of fabric there, but the machine and the needle handled it well. If you remember, the needles that I use at the moment are the Janome purple tipped ones, although they are not purple tipped. The purple is on the top, it's not on the tip, so it's these ones. So if anyone gets confused with the name, so you would think that this was the tip, okay, but they are purple tip ones, and they are for quilters, and they prevent skipped stitches when there's so much fabric. They really were my best buy, because it means that when I'm bag making, which as I've said is what I really like to do, when I'm bag making, there are so many layers, lots of sandwiches like this when you're putting everything together, and that's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 7 layers, plus the interfacing, plus the other piece of fabric, okay, so that is a lot of layers to get through, and using these stitches has really helped. So I'm going to open this out. It doesn't really matter which way you press this now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the seams, all of these seams, the bulky ones, I'm going to push them all down to the lining side, okay? So whatever fabric you're choosing, push those down to the lining side, and then just have your casing up to the outside fabric, okay? It just means that there's less bulk when you're sewing. And then just iron that flat. Okay, and then we'll do the same with the other piece. Now there obviously is less here, but I'm still going to push my seams down, okay, and then have my casing up. So my seams are all being pressed, I won't say to the dark side because both of these fabrics are quite dark, but they are going to the lining, okay? And then you should have your casing sitting up like this on both of your pieces, okay? So that is where we're going to be putting our elastic. Now I made one last night and I used some some ribbon. So this was the ribbon that I use, and it's not that thick. It's only about ½ an inch wide, but it didn't cinch properly, okay? So I do recommend that you use the little bits of elastic. It has made such a difference when you pull it. They stay cinched, whereas I use ribbon, they did not stay cinched, okay? So we're going to line up our seams now, okay? So you want both sides together and then lining up your seam the best that you can, okay? And then you can pop a pin in there if you wish. I'm putting it into the casing because that's the thicker part. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over and then I'm going to line up this side. Now I'm going to do this slightly differently. I will show you. So we now need our pudding shape. So what I did this morning before I came on air, is I used this saucer and then I drew from here, stopped at the bottom, I moved it across and then I drew round and met those sides up, but I just think that it's giving it too much of a pointed end. I think it's better to just be rounding. Let me open that out. If you can see the difference, I think it's better to have it wider at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this onto my corner, can you see? And then I'm going to draw with a pen. Now it doesn't matter because this is going to be within the seam, okay? So I'm going to draw a line just there on that corner, okay? And then I'm going to use that as my guide when I'm sewing round. So all I'm doing is rounding off those corners, okay? Now they're not going to be perfectly even. If you wanted to, you could cut once you've drawn one, and then you could flip it over and then use the pattern on the same side. But for speed's sake, I'm just going to draw those lines in, okay? And then the idea when you're sewing, so this isn't going to be my sewn line, so I'm not going to put my needle onto that line that I've drawn, okay? I'm going to use the inside edge of my foot. So this piece here, this bit here, okay, that is where I'm going to be laying my fabric and sewing from, okay? Just move my saucer out of the way. Put my foot back on. Make sure I've got enough thread coming out. Just turn that way so you can see. Now we need a turning gap. Those that know me well know that I often forget this, okay? So I'm just going to draw in a turning gap. About 2 inches is enough, okay? It's quite thick with the casing, but I've just drawn 2 lines there so I know not to sew past those lines, okay? Now going slowly over this bit because there's still lots of pieces of fabric there. There's 4 pieces of fabric there, which shouldn't be too hard for the machine, but you just need to make sure that you're going slowly, okay? Now I've placed my foot against my fabric, and then as I go down, once I get to that line, I'm going to use the inside of my foot as my guide, okay? So I'm going to hold my thread out, needle down, start sewing. Now when you get to these seams, and this is another tip for when you're bag making, stop, lift up your foot and then rest your foot back on top of those seams, stitch one again and then stop, lift it up and make sure all those seams are flat, because what will happen is the other part of your foot will come against here and it will lift it up, okay? So just go slowly, making sure that it does stay down. And then, as I said, I go a bit faster. When I get to where I've drawn that line, I have got where I've got the inside of my foot. Stop. The inside of my foot, I'm now lining it up with that colour that I've drawn. Okay. The dangers of using your start-stop button. If you press it, it does start the machine. So I'm just going to use that now, and I'm going to use that curve going all the way around, just pulling with this hand, okay, until I get to the bottom, and then I'm going to use my foot again as my guide for how far I want to have my seam, okay. So it's just over 3/8 of an inch, using my foot as my guide like that. I'm going to stop because I've got to the curve. I'm going to realign my foot again, as you can see, with my fabric, and then go up to the other side and take out my pin, and then remembering that all these seams need to be down. Now it's much easier on this way because my seams are facing the same way that I'm stitching. And then back round again. Stop. Just realign my fabric. And now I'm back to where I was going to leave my turning gap. Okay, so I'm going to sew forwards and then back stitch. And pull that out. And we will see what sort of shape that has given us. You can see there. It's a much fatter shape. Okay, and I think that's going to work better for this pouch. Now I'm going to bring in Betsy. Now this is why I have threads everywhere, because I cut on my ironing board. I'm just going to go all the way around with the pinking shears, because this will help with those corners, okay? Keeping those curves, thicker piece of fabric here, keeping those curves. Now when I get to my turning gap, I am not going to cut with my pinking shears into there, okay? And then I'll start again down at the other side. The reason being, if you use your pinking shears and cut in, it will be much harder to have a smooth seam when you sew that up. We are going to use the iron, and we're going to iron those seams flat and back on themselves, so that when we go to turn it, it will make all the difference. So if you can grab hold of one of these, they really are a great thing to keep your sewing room a bit tidier. Now take off my threads, and I'm going to bring in the iron again. So this is another good habit to get into, is if you do have a turning gap, so if you're making scrunchies, or even when you're bag making you need a turning gap, is to fold your seam back and then just iron it flat, okay, and then turn and fold the other seam back, okay. So now, because this was a straighter edge, it was much easier to do it. Sometimes you have to do it on a curve, but if you can avoid it, I would highly recommend it, okay. And then once it's cooled, it's still a bit hot, I put my finger into that gap, okay, and then I'm going to pull everything out. So there we go, just pulling it through that gap, all those layers, and then we'll use our iron again just to smooth out everything. Can anyone think of any other things that we could make? I was thinking this round shape would lend itself to a robin, but I haven't figured out how to make that work. If I do, you know that I will make a video for it, okay? Now I'm just going to use my iron again, and I'm going to iron these seams down. I mean, it is only a little gift pouch, but you get into the practice of doing these things when you're sewing. These are great habits to get into, okay? Just smooth that one down. Remembering you need to go back and sew up your lining, okay? Now I'm not going to do mine now because I have white thread on my machine, but as you can see, because we, let's push that bit out, because we ironed that, can you see how straight that is? Okay, so if you wanted to do a ladder stitch there, you could, or you could just put some dark grey thread in, which is what I'm going to do, and then I'm just going to do a very fine line of stitching down there, and then once it's inside, people aren't going to see. But if you're giving coins, you're going to need to sew that up, otherwise it's not going to, your coins are going to disappear. Okay, so now we just need to cinch it up. Now it has stayed, that was what I was hoping. Okay, so I've got my little pin, safety pin, I'm going to push, so there's our casing, I'm going to push that through, okay, all the way to the end, and then you go back on yourself, okay, all the way to the other side. Now I've used a white elastic because obviously I wanted it to blend with the white of the top of the cream on the pudding. So, and this one I only had black. I'm assuming you can get red elastic. I know red elastic is quite hard to find at the moment for obvious reasons, but you could use a very thin piece of ribbon. Now the ribbon that I tried, as I showed you, was just a normal thickness of ribbon, but you can buy sheer ribbon and very thin pieces of ribbon, and I think that would work if you can't get hold of a coordinating elastic. But I think it makes all the difference if the elastic is the same colour. The other thing you could use, where is mine, is this. The joke is you won't be able to see this. So this is invisible thread, okay? So sometimes when I hang things on the Christmas tree, if they've lost their original hanger, I will use invisible thread. There, you can just about see it. The other thing you could use is fish wire. I don't know how, is it called fish wire? I don't know. I've had necklaces that have got that sort of very, very, very fine, but thicker than that, thicker than the invisible thread. Karen is recommended florist ribbon because she's saying that's very thin. Thank you, Karen. I do have a florist down the road. I'm assuming she is doing click and collect, so I will go and ask. Thank you, Karen. So anything that you find that you think is going to be a good thing to thread it with is obviously going to be good for you. If you can't get hold of these things, whatever you've got will be okay. If you do have thick ribbon, then what you could do, now ribbon is notoriously tricky to sew on top of, okay, but what you could do is you could fold this down. If that's the only thickness that you have, you could fold it down and then you could do a stitch along there and you would make it thinner. I wouldn't recommend cutting it because then it would fray, but that could be your answer. So you just thread it through the other side and then pop that on. So, moment of truth. Let's cinch it up. Does it still look like a pudding? I think it does. Now I do think it needs some berries, and I think also you need, it's holly, isn't it? So it's probably a sprig of holly, so it would need some green leaves. Okay, I'm just going to stuff it. So we'd need some green leaves maybe, and a little sprig of holly. Now I think that would make it look perfectly like a Christmas pudding. Okay. There we go. We have a fat Christmas pudding that you can fit a gift voucher into. You could fit some money in there. You could use it for coins. You can use it for jewellery. You can use it for anything. So there's our Christmas pudding. And we also have our bauble. And there's our other Christmas pudding. So you can compare the sizes. I mean, it's whatever you think you feel you want to use. I just felt that this wasn't quite round enough, and I feel that this is is a better shape for it. And there's our white bauble. Okay, so just depending on what you've got, you could make these in plain fabrics and then you could free motion over them, or you could do some quilting on them to make them Christmassy colours if you don't have any Christmassy fabric but you've got red threads. So you could do some crisscross harlequin shapes, couldn't you? You could do some diamonds across, and then that would give you like a Christmassy effect. So if you make one, please post a picture so that we can see, and we will see you a bit later. I'm just going to switch off now and we're going to come back and have a question and answer time. Okay, so as I said, please post yours if you've made them, and we'd love to see them. Thanks then, bye.